The Times Network, starting yesterday, we've started a new mission, which is India Revival Mission. What will it take for India to revive? The lockdown so far has been a medical success, but the lockdown also is murdering the economy. A lot of companies are claiming that they are not in a position to pay their salaries. We know that there is a complete drying up of some sectors where the economic activity has come to a grinding halt, like aviation, hospitality, restaurants, autos. And between autos and tourism and hospitality, nearly 15% of India's GDP is coming. So the point which we want to argue, discuss, debate, deliberate and mull over is that can India really afford another lockdown? What is the best way to bring the economy back from this turf it has slipped into? Where are the cracks and how can really one cement the cracks? And if India has to adopt a policy of partial lockdown, what should be prioritized and what should not be prioritized? How can the cash flow of the economy be improved, and government, even though they may have intention to do the right thing for the economy, their financial ability to perhaps stroke the economy or physically boost the economy is going to be very limiting. So with that opening point, I also want to bring on board N. Venkatram, Deloitte CEO now. Venkat, fantastic to have you back and thank you for joining us. First things first, Venkat, do you think India can afford another lockdown, and lockdown should be removed post 3rd of May?
Well, as we have to look at two things. One, how's the progress on the virus itself? And two, what is the impact on the economy? The path that we chose as a country is to say that to arrest the spread of the virus, we should have a period of lockdown. We have had success as a result of that in terms of the spread of the virus. But the risk you run if you open up again is if you have a resurgence of the virus. Because a second lockdown could have very, very drastic and dramatic effects on our economy. The first lockdown itself has caused a lot of pain. We do have an economic and humanitarian crisis that we are dealing with. And therefore, the evaluation of whether you open up on Monday is really the issue of how sure and certain we are that the virus won't spread or there won't be a recurrence. Because if you open up early and you have a recurrence of the virus and have to lock down again, the impact will be far worse than waiting another 15 days.
Okay. In Deloitte's assessment, what has been the economic impact of the lockdown? Can you quantify some numbers? And if the lockdown, let's say, is extended by another 15 days, will that snowball or multiply into some sort of crisis?
Well, I would rather not give a specific number to it. The impact is significant. The concern I have as a citizen of this country is really towards what's happening to those who are the more underprivileged, what's happening on the MSME level. I think those of us who are more privileged, it's a question of saying that I'm just earning for 10 months a year rather than 12. But for the others, it's a question of living and livelihood. It's not just a question of livelihood. So therefore, a lockdown can never really be measured in economic terms. You have to look at the impact it has on life. So Nikunj, I would not really like to hazard a guess on that. I can only say that when we do open, we should have a very, very clear plan as to what our priorities would be, because we're hearing a lot about the stimulus that is required. We're hearing a lot about what we need to do in the future in terms of the fact that the country politics are changing. Countries are looking in terms of substituting their exports from China and what role India could play, etc. I would rather look more to the medium and long term and leave the short term to those who are in command of the situation.
How will the short-term situation get fixed? The credit is getting difficult. The Franklin Templeton episode is a clear indication of how risk aversion has kicked in. The fact that banks are not lending is also creating a jam. Now we both know that for any economy to survive and thrive and to recover, you need the credit market to start opening up again. You know, credit market is like blood. That's how I would like to draw an analogy. That needs a short-term solution. What could be that short-term solution to ensure banks that borrowers have ability to pay back? Not all of them will pay back, but not all of them will also not pay back.
Well, I think that, there are two people or two parties that everyone is looking to. One is the government itself to say what sort of stimulus will you give? And the second is the banks to say what is the contribution of the banks in this? How much pain will they take? Will they be recapitalized? Can they look in terms of funding the future recovery? Because when you get back to work as industry, the immediate issue is going to be how do you pay your workers? How do you get them back to work for you? How do you get your supply chains going, etc.? So, yes, I think that both the government and the banks will have to play a very important role in it. But the word of caution I have here is what we are really looking at is rebuilding the economy. It's not just a question of getting back to where we were. So the issue is not restitution. It's not a question of putting people back in the position in which they were. Because at one end of it, however dramatic it may sound, when you get into business, you recognize the fact that you won't always make profits. And therefore, there are periods when you have to bear your fair share of pain, regardless of whether these are, black swan events or not. So you cannot expect the government to reinstate your prior position. The government will need to prioritize to say, these are the future areas of growth for the country. This is the long-term view because recovery is going to be 12 to 24 months away at the minimum. And therefore, we need to put in steps in place that give us a longer-term recovery, whilst recognizing fully that there are certain steps we have to take in the short term. So don't just rely on what will happen in the short term, Nikunj, because I think the longer term will really define where the future of India lies.
Venkat, let's address the most critical part. A part where we know that A, there was a problem last year, and B, this year problem will intensify and the pain is only going to become excruciating. The SME and MSME sector. Where is the shape, given that the shape of the economy will shift from small to large and from medium to big and from big to mega, what happens to that pocket?
Well, if I am permitted by you to speak a little longer term, I think that really what the government needs to do immediately is to bring in the right policies that will move manufacturing to India. There is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to look in terms of import substitution, in terms of looking at what China is contributing to global exports and how much of that market could be brought to India. My general focus would always be to say, look at your own domestic market and what you need to do for your domestic market, build your capability, fix your supply chain logistics, etc., and then look in terms of what you can export. That would bring to us back to what you call the mega business, certain sectors that we would focus on, and at the same time would also, as part of the supply chain, bring back the MSMEs into the system. So therefore, the stimulus would also require a focused approach on rebuilding and not just on recreating. We have to also choose the countries we wish to work with, because certainly this is a game which is global. It's not something that is just limited to being played in India. You have to look in terms of how you collaborate globally to make in India too happen. So if you'd like me to continue, I can probably just give a number. China today exports about $2.3 trillion. I believe that the size of our opportunities, the addressable market that we can address, is about $1 trillion out of that. So therefore, if we can build our economy to its export potential, it will generate employment. We can also look in terms of what we need to do for our own people, for employment in terms of smaller areas such as food processing, which still have a potential for export, will also solve our problems and take care of the issue of migrant labor. Remember, this is a country that is resilient, and this is a country that gave India the food revolution, the food revolution, as well as the milk revolution. So we certainly can look in terms of how we can look at fruits, vegetables, and strengthen on the food chain. That's just an example, of how you can do it, and it's not going to take you a very, very long period of time to get there. But you certainly can't just look at the next 6 months. It has to be a 24-month look.
Okay. Right. While a lot of parallels have been drawn about what other developed economies are doing in terms of how much they've spent or how much they've stimulated their economy in percentage of the GDP, that's the most popular measure which everybody is commenting on. Do you think one should realize that in India the numbers would be different because of the underlying challenges and issues of the economy, and also, to be very frank, the ability of the government to spend, because the intention may not be there, but they don't have the muscle or the wherewith?
Well, it's become fashionable to look at it as a percentage of GDP and say, is it 10% of GDP or less, and what's more or what's less. I think that really from our perspective, we should go by our underlying philosophies. If our philosophy is to say, our philosophy and focus is to say, let's look at making India stronger, let India be more self-reliant, let us see how we take care of our people, and in particular those who are less privileged, our path may be slightly different. We cannot just compare ourselves with the developed nations. So for example, to just pick up on the point of import substitution, if you look at just electronics and electricals, our imports are about 42 billion. So why could you not look at a situation where you say your washing machines and your TV sets in the future will be manufactured out of India? It could be manufactured out of ventures or even allowing the foreign companies to come in and manufacture for you, but it creates employment. Do you have all the infrastructure in place for you to enable that to happen? Possibly no. But just think of the amount of precious foreign exchange you would save, particularly given the fact that the rupee will depreciate. So therefore, your philosophy could just be to say that to protect ourselves, there will be a certain element of protectionism that is going to come into all countries. You have to look in terms of your overall philosophy. You look at textiles again. India exports yarn and imports so much textile that each one of us wear. Perhaps you can say that Swadeshi 2.0 is really about manufacturing from India. And you have to look in terms of what are the regulations we need to change. How do we, I would go beyond just saying get the entrepreneurial spirit back, but to get the industrialist mindset back. Because in my perspective, and I've said this before, I think that this is a recovery from a war. This is not just an economic crisis. And therefore, you have to look at, in a sense, stirring the nationalist sentiment and looking at how you can make India stronger. That requires a national pride. It requires us to also use Indian products more. And this can be done only if our own industrialists have the ability to invest in the country. That will also encourage foreign investment. It will encourage manufacturing by foreign companies in India. 2.0 could be different from just saying that Indians need to manufacture. It's just that the manufacturing should be done from here, and a certain portion of that gets exported in order to meet the needs that the gap will come from the Chinese lack of exports. So that's really the way I was looking at it.
Okay, closing comments. Do you think somewhere sovereign now needs to start taking more guarantee of perhaps doing the heavy lifting, where the RBI takes a guarantee of what is happening to some loans, or somewhere Government of India will have to be a backstop?
I think the answer there is it depends, because as I've always said, the underlying premise is that when you are in business, you take risks, and you know the risks when you take them. Even as an investor, when I invest, even if I invest in a fund, for example, I know my return is linked to risk. You cannot expect a backstop on everything. The government should only backstop what it believes is good in the national interest. There is absolutely no need for restitution to put everyone back in the place he was or she was before the crisis happened. We just have to move on and create a stronger, more resilient economy, more plugged in and aligned to global trade.
All right, Venkat, really appreciate your time. Glad you could join us. You've always been very frank and vocal about your views and what you think is the right bent of the economy. Let's take a break with the news that we are holding on. We are holding on nicely and smoothly. Good. 94.64, 86 points higher for the Nifty, about 1% plus for the Sensex at 32404. That makes it 290 points higher.